their own nationality at sea, and especially acts of robbery and or criminal violence at sea, unquote. Oh, wow. As you can guess, that was written by an attorney. Keeping that in mind, we'll open the discussion with this map of pirate attacks that have occurred over the last 40 years. As we already talked about, the Caribbean has a long-standing history with piracy. Things have died down considerably since its peak way back in the 1800s, but there are still isolated incidents, especially against luxury yachts. You know, the rich people with them really big boats that go down there carrying all their jewels and their money. Anyway, they're the ones that get attacked for their valuables and cash. Most of those occurrences are off the coast of Venezuela and around the islands in the very eastern Caribbean, such as Trinidad and Tobago, Barbados, and Grenada. Now, the Strait of Malacca over on the Asian side lies between Malaysia and Indonesia. It's only 25 miles wide, with literally hundreds of small islands and rivers where the pirates can hide. It's one of the world's most important shipping lanes and also one of the most notorious for piracy. 1/4 of the world's traded goods pass through that strait every year. As a result, ships passing through the area are frequent targets for modern pirates. In West Africa, just south of Nigeria, Benin, Togo, and Ghana, you'll find the Gulf of Guinea. Today, it's also a well-known pirate hotbed. There are tankers carrying petroleum products that are being shipped to and from Nigerian refineries. And we're going to talk about that area in just a few minutes. But first, let it be known that the waters off eastern Africa are treacherous and filled with danger. When most people think about piracy today, they think of Somalia. We'll start there. Modern-day piracy, as we think of it today, started near Somalia off the Horn of Africa. The red lines on this slide indicate shipping lanes. The area is a major commercial route connecting much of the globe. Every day, tens of thousands of freighters, container ships, tankers, and sometimes cruise ships sail through here. Most transit the Suez Canal. That canal is critical for commerce and the economy in Europe, the Middle East, and Asia. Ships worth millions of dollars carrying millions of barrels of oil or other goods every day travel through these waters. Those cargoes are of unimaginable value. This slide shows how many Somalis live today. The pirate problem here is believed to have started with their civil war. That was back in the late 1980s. The country's government collapsed. Law enforcement on land and along the coast of Somalia simply didn't exist. Widespread poverty and famine and drought drove people to do desperate things. To make matters worse, foreign vessels were dumping toxic waste along the coast. Tankers sometimes discharged contaminated ballast water as they neared ports around the area. Ballast water, by the way, is water that tankers and other ships pump into their tanks to make the ship more stable because it settles down in the water a little bit more. Anyway, it's all very contaminated when they pump it back out. India, the Seychelles, South Africa, and other countries were fishing illegally in Somali waters. As a result, the supplies of fish for the Somali people were nearly exhausted. Because of this, the Somali fishermen were probably the first to turn to piracy. They were joined by former members of the Somali Navy and the Somali Coast Guard. Those people were essential to the overall operation because of their boat handling skills. Ex-militiamen who fought for local clan warlords and former government employees and military people provided the muscle. Technical experts operated computers, mobile and satellite phones, global positioning systems, and radar. Soon the pirate industry was no longer just a band of desperate fishermen attempting to protect their livelihood. Now they were attacking tankers and freighters and holding them for ransom. The pirates were a well-organized, well-armed, and focused group of individuals with one common goal: Somali pirates were after cash, loot, booty, ransom, whatever you call it, and nothing else. The owners of the hijacked ships would pay the ransom to get the ship and cargo back. And the pirates were more than willing to let the ship and crew go once that ransom was paid. Ultimately, pirate activity was organized, and that was by large syndicates with vast resources. Whatever ransom money was obtained, the bulk went back to those venture capitalists. Kind of sounds like Silicon Valley, doesn't it? Anyway, the syndicates solicited investors who bought shares in the organization to earn a percentage of the ransoms. Ransoms grew bigger and became more attractive. That led to a vicious investment cycle. More funds were made available and better equipment was put into the hands of the outlaws. The amount of money is believed to have been so great that major international banking institutions were involved. Ransoms totaling many millions of dollars a year have been paid. With the indirect cost of the shipping industry, it totaled some $12+ billion. Added expenses included insurance, naval support, legal proceedings, rerouting of slower ships, and some protective measures that were taken by ships' owners. Now, if you just assume a ransom of $1 million or so, say $2 million, was paid to the pirates to get a ship back, that sounds pretty high. Consider this. During the time that the ship was attacked or being held, it's not earning any freight income. In addition, the shipping companies have a liability for a material breach of contract for the cargo they're carrying because they're not going to deliver it on time. Interest on borrowing the money could be as high as $500,000 because banks didn't want to take the risk. They also paid for additional insurance premiums to transit the area where the pirates were active, and that could exceed $20,000 a day. The bottom line is we as consumers pay higher cost for goods, petroleum, and even transportation. The pirates' workload was divided into categories, and each pirate had a specific duty. Ransom shares for the pirates were based on who did the most dangerous job. Those performing hijacking at sea earned the most rewards. The first pirate to board a vessel received an additional bonus, such as a new vehicle or maybe some monetary incentives. If someone provided weapons or fuel or a skiff or a mothership, their share was much higher. Those who did the safer things on land got paid the least. Shore-based members of the gang were involved in caring for hostages or guarding them or guarding port facilities. Translators who negotiated the ransom with the ship's owners got a little bit more of a share. The Seychellois Coast Guard recovered an 11-page handwritten contract from a pirate skiff that they had arrested. It covered everything from the division of profits to an employee code of conduct. For those of you that were here for the Caribbean thing, it kind of sounds like going back in time, doesn't it, with some of our old-time pirates. The men were not allowed to fight with each other, and they were required to obey the captain's orders. If they broke that code, they would forfeit their shares, or possibly worse. They weren't dealing with the nicest boss, and their HR department was pretty rigorous. Free spending by the Somali pirate gangs caused wild fluctuations in the local currency and monetary exchange rates. Their strength and newfound wealth brought them a very high position in the local social and economic elite. That was both in Somalia and down in Kenya, just to the south. In a BBC interview with a Somali citizen, the reporter was told, quote, "They have money. They have power. They're getting stronger by the day. They wed the most beautiful girls. They have new cars and trucks, new guns. They're building big houses," unquote. The pirates were the most sought-after grooms for Somali women. Now, who was the most vulnerable to attack by these marauders? Container ships, because they have very large blind spots. You can see these big piles of cargo. Well, when you're up on the bridge alongside the ship, there's places you can't even see the water from there. And those blind spots allowed the pirates to get in close. These ships are also only staffed by about a dozen or so people at any given time. They tend to be slow and they're hard to maneuver. Their top speed generally is around 16 knots, and that's considered the absolute maximum that the ship can attain. Tankers are especially susceptible to boarding because they ride very low in the water, and they're also pretty slow. The pirates can simply toss a line up and catch the railing with a grappling hook. The first guy can climb up there, and then he can throw a rope ladder down so that the others can follow. When they got on board, the pirates would head to the ship's bridge to gain control. Many times, they would find on tankers and container ships that the crew had gone to a safe room to take refuge. Most of those rooms can't be penetrated from the outside. It's like going inside a vault, a bank vault, and closing the door behind you. They're also called the ship's citadel. From inside the citadel, the crew can operate the ship. They can communicate with military and law enforcement personnel and be safe from harm. They have ventilation, sanitary equipment, lighting, food, water, and first aid supplies. Might even have a little bottle of beer in there or two. Now, who didn't the pirates target? Well, they really didn't have any interest in cruise ships for a variety of reasons. Cruise ships ride very high in the water and they're pretty difficult to board. They're generally capable to operate at relatively high speeds and they can turn quite quickly. A high-end speed for a cruise ship is 22 to 25 knots. Small pirate craft out in the ocean can only run at about 17 knots. And that's in calm seas. When it gets rough, they have to slow down even more. The pirate craft will most likely run out of fuel before it can catch up to a cruise ship. That's not the only thing that happens. We'll talk about that in a minute. A cruise ship with passengers is also hard to sneak up on because the number of eyes on board kind of eliminate the element of surprise. Finally, there is the care and feeding and guarding of 1,000 or more hostages. And that would really eat into the profits. Got it? Eat in? No, never mind. Since the cruise guests and crew come from many different countries, the media spotlight would be focused on the pirates. From their point of view, that's really a bad thing. A lack of media attention meant that the governments around the world were less inclined to put significant resources into fighting the piracy. All of that said, there were still attacks against cruise ships that we'll discuss in a while. Now let's look at the history of pirate attacks around Somalia off the Horn of Africa. The first recorded attack on a commercial merchant vessel was in 2005. In that instance, the target was a liquefied natural gas carrier, the motor vessel Feisty Gas. No, I didn't make that name up. That ship was released with its crew of 12 after a ransom of over $300,000 was paid. It was the first of several vessels to be attacked that year. Now, would you pay hundreds of thousands of dollars just for a tank of gas? Not me. Next, a cruise ship, the motor vessel Seabourn Spirit, was attacked by pirates in 2 small speedboats. At the time, the Spirit was carrying over 200 guests and its crew. The pirates fired at the ship with machine guns and rocket-propelled grenades. Now, this ship's crew drove them off with water hoses and a long-range acoustic device, or LRAD. It was the first time an LRAD was used to deter an attack. This little device can knock an unsuspecting pirate off of his feet with an extremely loud, focused blast of sound. On full power, it can even rupture the eardrums and cause deafness. And that's maybe a half a mile or more than a mile away. At present, they're used primarily just to let the attackers know, oh, by the way, we see you. You've been spotted. But alas, in 2006, more Somali raids were reported. But sometimes, just occasionally, the pirates seemed to have a little bit of difficulty identifying the vessels they were attacking. Two ships that were confronted belonged to the U.S. Navy. A press release from the Navy stated that during a routine boarding of a suspected pirate vessel, the Navy team noticed that the small boat was armed with rocket-propelled grenade launchers. Well, the Navy personnel went back to their ships to report when the suspected pirates opened fire on the ships. The USS Cape St. George and the Gonzales returned fire in self-defense. It's kind of like taking a knife to a gunfight, but anyway, boom, oops. All that was left was a hole in the water. Poof, gone. No more pirates. Go Navy! In 2007, 5 merchant ships were seized and released after over $1 million each was paid by their owners. Now the attacks were occurring further and further offshore. The world was finally starting to wake up and take notice, but the pirates at the same time were getting more sophisticated. With more money, they could get better equipment, they could get more investors, and on and on. They started using some of the fishing vessels that they had captured as motherships. Fishing vessels were preferred because they didn't stand out among all of the other fishing vessels that were really fishing, and they could carry small speedboats and more crew and supplies. The mothership provides food, water, supplies, fuel for the small boats. When an attack craft runs low on those supplies, the mother is nearby for support. Isn't that nice? These motherships expanded the area in which the pirates could operate. And here, circled in red, you can see a little red speedboat. That's unusual color for their craft also, by the way. That's a skiff or a speedboat that was used for the attacks. Once the mother was in the area that they were going to do the assaults, the mothership would simply drop the small skiffs off and then move off a little bit. The skiffs, or high-speed boats, waited until a large ship came near, and then they attacked. Oh, wait a minute, it's time for the PVE stretch. Our captain has lost the engines, and we need to get out of here fast. Stand if you can, or just help me along. So let's start rowing our boat and sing along. Row, row, row your boat gently down the stream. Merrily, 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 life is but a dream. Row, row, row your boat gently down the stream. And if you see a pirate skiff, it's not your bocce team. Oh, come on, pirates are getting close, faster, harder. Row, row, row your boat gently down the stream. Merrily, 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 life is but a dream. Row, row, row your boat gently down the stream. If you see a pirate ship, don't forget to scream. Oh, wow, we made it. We got away. We told you to be able to warm up the room. 2008 saw a dramatic increase in the number of pirate hits. There were over 100 reported attacks. These are on major ships, not on just fishing vessels, of which 92 alone were in the Gulf of Aden between Yemen and Somalia. 42 of those ships were hijacked. By year end, 13 of those vessels with 242 crew were still being held hostage for ransom. Now let's look at who was approached in 2008. One attack was against this luxury French cruise ship called Le Ponant as she sailed off the Somali coast. She was really easy for the pirates to board because of the low platform on her stern. Now, normally, it was used for guests who wanted to take advantage of the ship's small craft that were launched for their recreation. But it gave the pirates a very convenient, easy way to get on board and take over the ship. Why Le Ponant's operators ever allowed her into a high-risk area has never been explained. In November 2008, an attempted attack was made against the motor vessel Oceania Nautica. While cargo ships and pleasure yachts have been attacked by Somali pirates, this was only the second time that they attacked a major cruise ship. Nautica had just sailed out of the Red Sea and was cruising eastward in the Gulf of Aden near Somalia. And here's a map of that moment. Two skiffs were hiding among the many fishing boats that are all shown there in those little red dots along the shipping lanes. The pirates approached the ship rapidly from off on its side. The strategy used by Nautica's captain was to outrun the skiffs. He went to maximum speed as fast as he could, and that he did most successfully. Now, if necessary, he could have also made dramatic course changes. The turbulence in the wake caused by the ships turning could be more difficult for the pirates to get on board because they can't anticipate the movement of the ship back and forth as it's turning back and forth as it goes. Turbulence would also capsize the pirates' small boats, or perhaps the cruise ship's stern could even hit them. Now, how does a captain know when the pirates are coming? Modern radar is so sophisticated that it can identify oncoming ships of nearly any size. Today, there's even a holographic system that's now used in conjunction with standard radar. And it looks around the ship so that the people on the bridge can just look at their screen and observe a target. The system is so unique that it can form an actual image of an approaching vessel of nearly any size. Well, now comes the question, why not just blow the suspected vessels out of the water? The simple answer is, unless they attack first, it's often difficult to tell the difference between innocent fishermen, human smugglers, or pirates. Firing on an unarmed vessel that may be innocent of any crime is an act of war. And that's probably not a good thing. Ships' owners are reluctant to arm their crews. Understandably, they don't want them to be lugging weapons around like some sort of a military ship while they're just doing their jobs. Added to those problems are liability, extensive firearms training, and the cost of providing and maintaining the weapons. Now, there are no international laws against arming the crew, but some countries don't allow vessels with firearms aboard to enter their waters. So if you go into, for example, French Polynesia, you have to have their customs people come aboard. You have to surrender all the weapons on the ship, put them into storage, then the ship can come in, and then before you leave, you have to go get them back out. It's a real pain. Anyway, the other big problem is I believe that captains might be just a little bit uncomfortable arming a crew that has very diverse nationalities and giving them deadly weapons. Those crews don't all necessarily get along. By the end of 2008, piracy off the coast of Somalia was out of control. Something had to be done. To protect traffic in one of the most heavily used waterways in the world, several nations came together to establish what was called the Maritime Safety Protection Area. Its mission was to set up patrols along the Arabian Sea and the coast of Africa to combat terrorism and piracy. The traffic lanes through the Gulf of Aden were put into place and heavily patrolled by vessels from the task force. Ships transiting the area were escorted by military ships. Now, they rarely use convoys because convoys can only go at the speed of the slowest ship. And because of the cost of operating a major ship is so high, that lost time can be a severe financial hardship on the ship's owners. Perhaps the most famous pirate attack was in 2009 against the Maersk, Alabama. Have all of you seen the movie Captain Phillips? If you haven't seen it, I strongly recommend that you see it. Get it on Netflix if you can. That was a very, very accurate portrayal of the whole Somali pirate issue. The attack was a little unusual in that the pirates were 400 miles east of Somalia in the Indian Ocean. 21 American crewmen, including Captain Richard Phillips, were taken hostage. Well, Phillips talked him into letting the crew go and letting the ship go and keeping him as a hostage, and he was held hostage on a lifeboat. 4 days later, a combined effort of the United States Navy SEALs and Marine Corps snipers killed 3 pirates and rescued the captain. In 2010, there were more pirate attacks, but by then only 38 were successful. Somalis continued to assail merchant ships, but the number of assaults against fishermen was still way more, in the vast majority. There was an increase in international military patrols near the Somali coast in an effort to deter the pirates. A no-sail zone was set for 200 miles off the coast of Somalia. Well, the pirate activity just moved further offshore each year. And this map shows color gradients, the lightest color being the initial zone, and then each as it gets darker and darker goes further out from the coast till you get to the darkest color, which is as far as they went. The pirates just moved their business further out each year into the ocean, and then the merchant ships would move still further out. Now the pirates had pretty soon expanded their area from Somalia all the way down to the Seychelles, 932 miles away. This time they attacked a fishing vessel. A Seychellois Coast Guard vessel intercepted them and demanded the release of the fishermen. The pirates refused unless that ransom was paid. After several hours, the Coast Guard guy got a little bit fed up and he fired at the pirate boat, setting it ablaze. It sank and all the fishermen were rescued. There was no report of the whereabouts of the pirates. Just a couple of days later, in the same area, another attack was attempted. Apparently, they still hadn't learned how to identify different types of ships, particularly on a moonless, dark night. A large ship was sailing slowly to the south at 1 o'clock in the morning with the lights as shown here. A small speedboat carrying Somali pirates quickly headed toward the larger ship planning to attack. They fired a rocket-propelled grenade at what they believed to be a large merchant vessel. Oops. Bad decision. The ship was the USS Nicholas, a Navy frigate. She was on anti-piracy patrol and had all of her defensive systems energized. Nicholas returned fire because they could calculate where the rocket-propelled grenade came from and sank the small boat. Soon a mothership was captured along with 5 pirates. Go Navy again! Those men were brought to the United States for trial. Their court-appointed lawyers gave them their options. They could plead not guilty and proceed to trial. In a trial, they could be found not guilty and simply be deported back to Somalia. They could also be found guilty and sentenced to death. Finally, they could throw themselves on the mercy of the court, plead guilty, and be sentenced to life in prison. Now, what would you choose? All 5 of the pirates pled guilty. They were convicted and sentenced to life in prison in the United States. Now tell me, if you came from a place where there was no food, no running water, terrible living conditions, and where some warlord could shoot you for sport, what's so bad about living in an American prison? You get air conditioning, 3 square meals a day, your own bed, clean clothes, recreation, television. You're never going to get that at home. Now, at the same time, what was being done about the pirate problem started to get more and more emphasis. Shown here are 2 of the 5 patrol vessels that were given to the Seychelles by the United Arab Emirates. Those boats significantly augmented the local Coast Guard, which previously had only 2 patrol boats. Another turning point in the war against piracy happened at about the same time. The Seychellois Supreme Court handed down sentences of 22 years in prison to some Somali pirates. That was a result of a new anti-piracy amendment in their law. Now, I'm pretty sure, I'm almost positive as a matter of fact, that the Seychelles prisons are not quite as nice as ours. In fact, we were there and they had these Pakistani fishermen that were fishing illegally. This is a little bit of an aside. And they didn't put them in prison. They just locked their boats down in the harbor. So they're anchored out in the harbor. They couldn't get out of the harbor. They couldn't get any food. They couldn't go ashore. They just sat there the whole time their trial and everything was going on, and then through the time that they had to spend in jail. But anyway, it acted as a deterrent. Over 50 countries supported the effort to eradicate Somali pirates. Military response brought a pretty rare show of unity by countries that have been hostile to each other in the past. You know, like North Korea and Japan and the U.S. and China and Russia, and people like that. In 2011, an international fleet known as the Combined Task Force 150 was established. They also used unmanned drone aircraft to extend their surveillance areas. Now, what other acts were employed to counter the pirate attacks? Armed sea marshals are put aboard ships when that vessel is approaching an area of great risk. Those sea marshals are on duty watching over the waters 24/7, every day, 24 hours a day. At least a couple of them are up on deck walking around. I got time for another quick aside. When they came aboard the ship we were on, the last time we saw them anyway, we're on a ship where the demographic is kind of like here at Paradise Valley. Okay, they're senior citizens. Here come these 6 young guys, all about 24 to 27 years old, about 6'8", weight about 250, shoulders about that wide. And they're carrying, those portable bags you carry your golf clubs in when you go on a trip? That's what they're carrying. Now, it's obvious they weren't coming to the ship for the PGA. And those weren't golf clubs that were in the bags. Anyway, they were there as part of the detail to protect our ship. They're generally people with experience in maritime law enforcement or ship protection. They often include former Navy SEALs or Marines, and many times, in fact, most times that we ran into them, they were former Israeli Mossad or from other countries, and they're very well trained and focused for this kind of work. Other measures include fire hoses or fixed water jets to knock the pirates off. When the crew is aware of a pirate attack coming, they'll flood their ballast tanks, and then they'll pump them out through these jets and fire hoses to keep everything at full pressure. Oh, by the way, when the cruise ships go into the area, in addition to having those nice young guys that don't fit in with the rest of the guests on board, they also put their fire hoses and they're energized out on deck. So you'll be walking along and there's a fire hose laying there. Not a fire, it's just they're getting ready for the potential. Special purpose nets fired from a ship can foul the propeller and rudder of a small boat. If you've ever been to a ball game and they fire those t-shirts up into the stadium, it's kind of the same idea. You have this little ball of net and they fire it up, it's got floats on it, gets in front of the pirate boat and wraps up in their propellers and stops them. Other measures to stop the pirates included lasers that were used to interfere with the attacker's vision. Some container ships and tankers have barbed wire installed all along their rails to deter the pirates. Now, that's pretty effective, but not real attractive. One company in the Netherlands developed a 9,000-volt electric fence that was put around container ships. The wires are installed aboard the ship, and they provide a jolt to anybody who touches it, comes into contact with it, which would make them kind of let go and drop back into the water. Now, I don't think you're going to see either the concertina wire or the electric fence on your cruise ship veranda anytime you go on a cruise. And the electric fence will not be used on a tanker. They got it. Sparks are not a good thing. This slide shows data that was directly related to Somali pirate attacks. Now, the good news was that the piracy off the coast of Somalia and in the Indian Ocean had essentially been eradicated by the end of 2014. Off the coast of Somalia, there were no successful attacks on merchant ships. In 2015, the International Maritime Board didn't record any actual or attempted attack off of Somalia in the Red Sea, the Arabian Sea, or the Gulf of Aden. That area, once known as Pirate Alley, was now considered essentially free from Somali pirates. But authorities decided they'd just keep the security and task forces in place for a little longer. In March of 2017, pirates hijacked a commercial ship. It was a tanker, and that after learning that a Somali businessman had hired the ship to carry his oil. I guess they realized it's not a good business to attack one of your own. Pirate attack began to ramp up once more in 2018. This map shows, as of May of this year, the high-risk area that had been expanded again. And that happened because on the 19th of April of this year, 2 fishing vessels were attacked. These were major fishing vessels by pirates off the coast of Somalia. Both of those attacks were thwarted, but security officials said, well, that's kind of a reminder that the anti-piracy measures are still required in the area. Currently, there are still international naval forces in the Somali region that are engaged in counter-piracy activity. Their primary mission is military support in Afghanistan, but they also work on the war against the pirates. Cruise ships still carry armed mercenaries on board. They hold pirate drills where the guests practice going inside and sitting down or squatting in the interior hallways of the ship. And the passengers are warned not to go get your cameras and go out on deck to take pictures. You may think that's funny, but when the Nautica was attacked, that's exactly what happened. People went out on deck to take pictures of the pirates. I told people when I was giving this lecture aboard ship, if you decide to do that, please tape a little note to your camera telling your heirs to send me the pictures. So where'd the Somali pirates go? Well, not the individual pirates, but some of the syndicates have moved to Indonesia, India, and Southeast China. The West African coast, where we were just attacked back when we did the Ro-Ro routine, has seen a huge increase in pirate activity in the Gulf of Guinea, mostly along Nigeria, Ghana, and the Ivory Coast. This area is an important source of oil, minerals, and cocoa. Now, Susie would probably don an eye patch and steal chocolate if she could. Yes, you would. Estimates of the annual cost of piracy in the Gulf of Guinea, now remember this is mostly for oil and oil products, range up to $2 billion a year. Countries in the region get 60% of their revenue from oil resources originating in or transiting through that Gulf. Maritime threats in the Gulf of Guinea constitute a collective challenge to all stakeholders in the region as well as internationally. Nigeria was one of the first to be hit. In 2010, improvements were made in the collaboration between the Nigerian Navy and their national security forces. Jointly manned vessels with U.S. Coast Guard and Navy personnel conducted law enforcement and anti-piracy patrols backed with by electronic surveillance systems. That reduced the number of attacks around Nigeria, but most of that was within the territorial seas and harbor approaches. Unfortunately, the number of pirate attacks increased off the coast of neighboring Benin. In 2011, Nigerian vessels began jointly patrolling the waters with Benin's security forces. The number of actual and attempted attacks did drop almost immediately. Pirate attacks here occurred mainly in close offshore waters, terminals, and harbors, rather than out on the high seas. And unfortunately, international forces are hindered in doing anything when the attacks are not out in the open ocean. In 2012, the International Maritime Bureau reported that the number of vessels attacked by West African pirates had reached a new world high. At the beginning of 2014, Nigeria announced a 60% drop in crude oil theft. They said that was due to, among other things, the deployment of newly acquired patrol boats to combat the pirates. There was also the addition of fast inshore patrol craft and offshore defense ships, including former U.S. Coast Guard cutters. Shown here is one of the 2 former high-endurance cutters that were transferred to Nigeria to combat piracy. This is the former U.S. Coast Guard cutter Chase, a sister ship of one that I had command of. Chase was renamed the Nigerian naval ship Thunder. Benin, Ghana, Liberia, Nigeria, and Senegal have since improved their coastal surveillance assets with the assistance from the United States and the European Union. Now, if we're still doing these presentations next year or maybe the year after, we got presentations that go for 20 more years. Anyway, we may cover many of those countries in more detail. The pirates, though, are an offshore manifestation of criminal activity within the onshore oil sector. A long-term solution to Western Africa piracy requires increased refinery capacity in Nigeria, anti-corruption reform with the local governments, and a cooperative maritime security regime spanning the entire region. As happened off Somalia, the increase in pirate attacks in West African waters prompted the commercial countermeasures. Oil companies hire private military and security contractors to provide protection. Use of those contractors, though, has raised some kind of fundamental questions in the area over sovereignty, equity, and governance. But they did have a positive impact on reducing the incidence of successful piracy. Well, that's it for today. And fortunately, with your help in rowing us out of danger, we've avoided another pirate attack and continue our cruise. We'll sail north to Greenland and Iceland. Our navigator, also the writer, director, whatever else she is, calculates that the motor vessel PBE should arrive on June 18th at 2 p.m. That's 1400 hours in sailor talk. We'll explore Greenland, the largest landmass on Earth that is not a continent. It was rumored that our Air Force, lost a nuclear bomb somewhere on Greenland. What's up with that? And who are the native people and what's their life like? As a bonus stop, the motor vessel PVE will continue on and visit Iceland, weather permitting. We'll learn that Iceland is an island geologically tied to both Europe and North America. What are the Icelandic sagas? What about their cute little horses with a very unique gait? What world leaders met in Iceland? And more importantly, what kind of schnapps do they serve on the island? Anybody have any questions about today's presentation?
When you served in the Coast Guard, were you ever on a ship that had to go after a Somali pirate, any pirate?
He wanted to know if I ever chased the Somali pirates when I was in the Coast Guard. No, because by the time I left the Coast Guard, the Somalis hadn't even had their civil war yet. Right now, a lot of people think that the Coast Guard only has things around the United States. They don't. They got people in the Middle East, they got people in the Far East, they got people in Antarctica, they got people in the Arctic. They're all over the place. The guys in the Middle East, some of them are still doing harbor security and port security kind of things. They're also actively involved in the anti-piracy things in the Gulf of Guinea and in the Middle East. So they are all over the place. But that was a whole new mission that came up after I said sayonara. So that was it. Anything else? Yes, sir.
You didn't touch on the Russians, that the Russians have power. The answer to that was they pulling them back from their ship, put assassinating on it, they left.
He wanted to know how the Russians handled the pirates. I don't know of them ever taking a pirate aboard a ship to then do bad things. But I do know that there were several reports where a Russian ship would see what they suspected was a pirate vessel, and they would just blow it out of the water. They had a whole different set of rules that they went by than our people went by, and of course their whole attitude is different. The French also, by the way, did the same thing. If somebody came after a French military ship, they'd do the same thing. They'd just fire on it. They wouldn't wait to see what was going on. See, they want to get out because we didn't give them any cookies this week. Okay, thank you very much for the gift of your time.